Before the lens, the painter served a public role. He was a documentarian of myth and power, a recorder of the impossible and the sublime. Kings hired him to make them look immortal. Churches commissioned him to reveal the invisible. Even a portrait of a merchant had civic gravity. It announced permanence in a world of rot. Then came the camera. It could do the same job faster, more accurately, and for a fraction of the cost. A man with a tripod could give you a likeness in minutes. The painter, once a master of realism, became redundant. What use was a 100-hour canvas when a glass plate could etch the world in silver? This was not a small disruption. It gutted an entire artistic tradition. For centuries, painting had competed on the grounds of fidelity, to the world, to the body, to nature. Now that fidelity could be automated, art lost its ground. The result was a crisis, not of tools, but of meaning. Painters were free, but to do what? Their ancient function had been annihilated by chemistry. There was no longer a public reason to paint something that already existed. So the question changed. If you cannot depict the world better than a machine, then what is left to do? Most artists had no answer. Some fled into decoration, others into politics. Some waited to die, but one man ran toward the abyss and claimed it as his own. His name was Picasso. With realism outsourced to the machine, the painter stood naked. What remained was not craft, but crisis. The old masters had rules: composition, anatomy, harmony, line. These were not constraints, they were coordinates. They tethered the artist to a shared world. But with those coordinates gone, the painter floated in the void, groping for meaning. The academy lost its power. The salon was mocked. Beauty itself was treated with suspicion, as if the pursuit of proportion and form were some bourgeois perversion. In place of skill came slogans. In place of reverence, irony. What began as confusion curdled into contempt. It wasn't only artists who felt the ground give way. The public did too. Once they could look at a painting and see their gods, their leaders, their stories. Now they were told to marvel at color fields, soup cans, or a crucifix in a jar of urine. They were assured it was meaningful. That if they didn't understand it, they were the problem. Art had become a priesthood, closed, cryptic, and hostile. Yet the problem wasn't complexity. Western man had appreciated intricate symbolism for centuries. The problem was disconnection. Art had lost its civic mandate. It no longer belonged to the city, the people, or the sacred. It served only itself. And at the heart of this drift stood the unanswered question: what is the artist for, if not to show the world? Picasso would answer that. But his answer was worse than silence. It was noise. Noise with a pedigree. Picasso did not restore art's meaning. He made its absence into a style. His answer to the collapse of realism was not to rebuild, but to fragment. Cubism, his flagship contribution, was not a new order, but a performance of disorder. He took the visible world, broke it apart, rearranged the shards, and declared it insight. What began as a technical experiment quickly became a manifesto. Perspective was bourgeois. Coherence was passé. The eye could no longer be trusted, so the artist substituted his feelings for your sight. A woman's face might have 7 eyes. A violin might be flattened into splinters. A cityscape became an accident. The artist's disorientation was the subject. This was not progress. It was surrender dressed up as genius. The canvas no longer told a story. It expressed a mood. And the mood was usually confusion. What mattered was no longer what the viewer experienced, but what the artist claimed to have felt. Art became autobiography disguised as composition. A private therapy session scaled for museum walls. This inversion severed the artist from his role as public craftsman. He no longer shaped a world for others to enter. He held up a distorted mirror and insisted it was profound. The viewer, once a participant in a shared cultural language, was reduced to an intruder in someone else's solipsism. Picasso painted his mind, and the galleries called it vision. But what he really gave the world was permission to abandon it. Picasso's new art required an interpreter. The common man, once moved by saints or battle scenes, now stood before a jigsaw of confusion. He was told it meant something deep, something beyond him. This was the beginning of the expert class in aesthetics: critics, curators, theorists, men who lived not to create, but to explain the mess others had made. Art ceased to be something you saw. It became something you deciphered. And in the process, It lost its power. The peasant who once wept before an icon now shrugged at a canvas. The veteran who once saw himself in a historical tableau now squinted at rectangles. Picasso had taken the visual language of civilization and scrambled it. Others followed. They mistook opacity for seriousness. They learned to mistrust the beautiful, to equate difficulty with depth. The gallery became a place of initiation into ugliness. One had to be trained to enjoy it. It was no longer enough to feel. You had to be told what to feel and why. This was not refinement, it was decay, not of technique, but of orientation. Art had once pointed outward to the divine, the heroic, the possible. Now it curved inward and folded over itself. The artist became a provocateur, the patron a dupe, the audience a ghost. The work existed only to make a statement, and the statement was always some variation on the same tired confession. I am broken, and so are you. This was not culture, it was self-harm with a frame. Picasso opened the gates and 1,000 lesser men poured through. They saw that art no longer needed to serve the public. It didn't need to be beautiful, true, or even intelligible. It needed only to be new. And if not new, then disturbing. The worse it made you feel, the more profound it must be. A generation of artists stopped trying to elevate and began trying to shock. They scrawled on canvases, nailed garbage to walls, arranged dead animals on pedestals. They called it a critique of modernity. In truth, it was a grift. They could not inspire, so they insulted, and the market rewarded them. The institutions followed suit. Art schools stopped teaching drawing. Museums became laundromats for hedge funds. Critics wrote their apologies in Marxist jargon, pretending the emperor's nakedness was some radical statement on coloniality or gender. It worked. For a time. As long as the audience believed there was meaning behind the madness, the game could continue. But meaning cannot be faked forever, and once lost, trust rarely returns. The real tragedy wasn't the mediocrity of the art, it was the collapse of its social role. Once an artist could shape a people's identity. Now he curates his trauma for clicks. Once, a painting could rally nations. Now it gathers dust in an empty room, guarded by a plaque no one reads. What Picasso began in arrogance, his followers completed in despair. The result is a civilization that decorates its walls with ruins and calls itself brave. There was another path. It stood open the entire time. Picasso never took it. He stared so long into his own reflection that he forgot the world was still there. But the artist's purpose had not vanished. It had only shifted. The camera could depict what is, but only the artist could depict what could be. This is the road he never walked. To paint not the self, but the possible. To give form to things that do not yet exist. Visions, dangers, longings, worlds. Not dreams in the Freudian sense, but dreams as architecture. Schematics for civilizations, signals to the future. Art had always done this before. The frescoes of the Renaissance did not merely imitate life. They shaped it. The Gothic cathedrals were not reflections of a society, they were blueprints for one. The icons of Byzantium were not psychological expressions, they were invitations to sanctity. These images made people act, they moved them to build, fight, repent, rule, pray. That is the function Picasso ignored, the capacity of art to summon what is not and make it seem near, to offer the better and the worse and thereby force a choice. An artist does not need to be a prophet, but he must at least be a builder. Picasso offered only demolition. He saw the ruin, but mistook it for revelation. The future needed a scaffolding. He gave it a smashed mirror, and the world, lacking anything else, hung it in the museum. If art once helped build civilizations, then the question before us is not what art should express, but what kind of people it should shape. This is where Picasso failed. He believed the artist's job was to expose his interior chaos, but the culture did not need more exposure. It needed orientation. Real art provides direction. It presents the noble and the terrible, the real and the imagined, not to impress, but to instruct. It tells the viewer, this is what we could become, and this is what we must avoid. It clarifies the stakes of life. It doesn't reflect the world as it is. It reflects the world as it might be, for better or worse, depending on the strength of your soul. The artist is not a therapist. He is not a mystic. He is not a wounded genius bleeding on canvas. He is a craftsman, and his craft is moral vision. The Greeks knew this. So did the Romans, the Byzantines, and the medievals. Their art was aspirational, not autobiographical. A society that wants to survive must place its highest ideals in view, not as slogans, but as images worth striving toward. A child cannot become what he has never seen. Today, art is praised for being brave when it wallows in weakness. But a culture that teaches its artists to cry instead of build will never rise. It will only remember its pain. To recover our sense of direction, we must again require that art point somewhere. We live in a world that is exquisitely imaged but spiritually blank. Screens glow with perfect resolution, yet reveal nothing worth becoming. The tools of representation have never been stronger. The content has never been weaker. This is not a technological failure. It is a civilizational one. The artist must once again become an architect of the future, not by predicting it, but by offering visions capable of summoning it. This does not mean utopias. It means symbols with weight, forms with purpose, and beauty with direction. An art that shows what a man could be if he were stronger, purer, more devoted, or what a people might become if they do not turn away from each other. To do this, artists must be willing to reject the cult of the self. They must abandon the museum as confessional. They must recover their place among the builders of the city, not as entertainers, not as eccentrics, but as citizens with aesthetic duties. A culture without shared imagery will not last. It cannot dream. It cannot remember. It cannot transmit what it values. That is the challenge Picasso ducked. That is the wound we still carry. The task now is to heal it, not with therapy, but with vision. The kind of vision that lifts the eye and stirs the will. The kind of art that makes boys want to become men and makes men ashamed to be cowards. We have had enough of fragments. It is time to raise a standard.